Welcome to Ask the Expert on Contingent Workforce Strategies LinkedIn Group. Number one community in LinkedIn, talking about all things contingent, staffing, the gig economy, and the future of work. I've got a really important and amazing topic today that, you know, it's always been around, but really started to trend during the pandemic and after, when remote work became normal and our talent communities and talent pools and client base became truly global. And not only I have a great topic talking about going global, I have an amazing guest today. He's one of the top minds making it simple to go global. And I've gotten to know him over the last couple of years, and he's also just an amazing person who lives in Kristiansand, Norway, and has over 15 years of experience in the industry and has been helping large organizations with their global expansion for all of those years. He worked for one of the largest MSP programs, Kelly, and then is currently working for an amazing employer of record called Paracar. Marius Smorvik, thank you for taking the time out of your day today and spending it with me and talking about expansion and going global with the contingent workforce programs.
Thank you, Jeff, for that amazing intro. Good job saying the name of my city and my last name correctly. That's hardly ever happened before. Great to be here.
I practiced. So, Marius, this is second nature to you. And I find also with Europeans, it's very, you think globally, right? In general. North Americans often, because of the scale of the US operations, often think egocentrically and North America, etc. And as soon as you start to think about going global, it gets very intimidating because, as we know, there's lots of variations to the theme in terms of employment laws and compliance, cultural differences, etc. And expanding global often becomes intimidating for program leads. So let's start off with why is this so important and what are we talking about today, right? So the why, expanding global, what have you seen from your experiences? What is the why companies are looking to expand their programs globally and having a global footprint?
Well, in terms of expanding globally from a business perspective, there can be any number of reasons that's a given. Could be just expanding into new markets, finding the growth in new countries, new regions, and anything like that. But in terms of talent specifically, I would argue that talent doesn't recognize borders, right? And I think that's the key perspective here, that the best talent is not going to live within a 15-minute commute from your headquarters. If you want to find the best talent for your program or for your open role or for your company or whatever the case may be, you may have to look in untraditional places. You may have to look internationally. And sometimes the talent just isn't available. Sometimes the talent is available at a better quality or a better price point, and it could be any number of reasons. Or just in the sense that you are expanding into a new market, you may want to engage people that are more integrated into the market that you are looking to expand into. So for me, any company with any kind of international ambition, hiring globally is just second nature and should be second nature. Also for companies that already operate globally, I just think that there are so many amazing people out there that never get the opportunity because they live in the wrong country or not close enough to the headquarters or these things. So for me, yeah, definitely second nature for any ambitious organization to look globally for talent.
Yeah, and it's also interesting, like you said, the ones that already operate globally, the program doesn't operate globally, right? We've seen that a lot of times where it was easy and the low-lying fruit was the
Yeah.
Americas, right? Because it was close, it's where the head office is, etc. And then there's as much and or a growing spend or a growing need to start to pull in the rest of the world and the workers that are working in their external workforce into the program as well to provide visibility. We've often joked about the growth of the independent workforce and the contingent workforce, the freelance workforce, growing from kind of the in the shadows at 10-15% to being now 30 and 40 and 50% of the workforce. And
Yeah,
when an HR professional says, "Oh, we don't have any contingent workers," or "I don't take care of that," they're missing half of their workforce now in everything they're doing.
yeah,
And
exactly
it's
right.
very similar when it comes to global. If you say, "Oh no, let's just leave the difficult stuff dealing with the global footprint in different countries," you're often missing a big percentage of your workforce that's getting work done for you.
Yeah, and I think thinking holistically about your talent pool also across borders is just key to having a coherent employer and HR strategy across your entire operations. Because just like you said, a large portion of your talent is going to be outside of the traditional internal in-country, in-region workforce. You'll find that you have independent contractors. A lot of them are also what we like to call like traveling workers. I forgot the term at the moment, but
Yeah.
they'll typically want to work from wherever they want. They're not fixed to any location, and having some kind of policy or a strategy that really feeds into that and actually takes care of those workers in the same way that you take care of your own workers is going to be a key part of any serious international company strategy, because otherwise you are going to be at a disadvantage in terms of managing and attracting that talent.
Yeah, and you've said it many times, the talent pool is global, but
Yeah.
and the reasons for it, why you would attract talent, it's because certain talent, you just can't get it anywhere else, and the quality is better in certain jurisdictions. It's amazing some of the you know, growing economies, how they've invested in education and the quality of talent coming out of those at inexpensive pricing in comparison to, call it, the Western world, European, and let's call it the US, Canada, etc. So this is where strategically it makes a lot of sense to start to think globally about that and investigate these regions that have great talent that you may traditionally have overlooked because it wasn't 45 minutes from your office.
Yeah, exactly. And we see a lot of offshoring for cost savings reasons, but I like to focus more on just the availability of the talent and the diversity of the talent. I think if you're looking to be a global company, it just makes sense to have a global workforce that reflects your customer base and your markets. And in order to have that, you can't focus all your employees around your home base. You can't force people to relocate into your headquarters country and things like that. And I believe this very strongly because I've lived it myself throughout my 11 years working for Kelly Services. I worked remotely from Norway. I did it before it became cool, Jeff. I always like to say that because back in the day when I worked remotely for Kelly from Norway, people would be like, "Oh, you work from home. How does that work? Is this like a telemarketing job or like what are you doing? Is this multi-level marketing?" I'm like, "No, it's a serious job. I'm a lawyer. I work for a big US corporation. And actually, I'm having quite a good career over there." They didn't get it. And then and then COVID hit. And then suddenly everyone was like, "Oh, you work from home. That's really cool. That's amazing. I wish I could do that all the time." So like the whole perception of that has really changed. And especially if you're in a global company, you're operating across all the different time zones anyway. So there are many, many advantages with having people in the different regions and different time zones. When I managed my biggest team at Kelly, I had employees in the US, in Europe, and in India at the same time.
Yeah,
And being based in Europe was actually the perfect location then because I actually had overlap in the working hours with both the teams
exactly. Yeah.
outside of Europe, and I could manage them effectively. And those kind of things really become important when you manage global teams. And also in terms of just identifying the best talent in the best markets and so on, I don't really like to focus on the cost savings aspect of this. I know a lot of companies do, and it's a reality in our world that we will have to live with. Just like a lot of companies are now downsizing to implement AI, and they're figuring out that it's actually not all that much cheaper. So they're sort of reversing those decisions. I kind of think of this the same way. The priority should always be quality, right? So I like to think of it as finding the best talent for the need that you have, no matter where that person lives. That's my perspective.
100%. And You mentioned hours of work and where you lived overlapped other regions very well. That brought up the idea of obstacles to expanding global and some of the things you have to think about. You know, there's obstacles, but I think there are more things to think about, right? And variables when you start to expand globally. So what are some of those obstacles or things to think about that are just not, the same as America?
Yeah, yeah. Do you want to spend the rest of the call just listing up those obstacles, or it's quite the list? No, I just think being a European, and I think there's a reason why a lot of the multinational staffing companies tend to be European. I think that is just because we have a very international mindset here, because we have about 50 countries that are pretty close to us. And even in Canada and also in the US, of course, you have the states which are very different and culturally different, but you still have a legal framework that's unified. And you also have shared language for the most part, excusing, of course, the French-speaking Canadians.
Yeah.
But in Europe, that's just not the case. You have dozens of languages and dozens of legal frameworks. Even with the EU, it's a supernatural, not natural, but supranational, it's a hard word to say for a Norwegian, legal entity or legal framework that is on top of already existing in-country framework. So it's just supplementing and sometimes replacing, sometimes unifying, but oftentimes not. Even the agency work directive, which was supposed to harmonize agency work across the EU region, still has a bunch of like these exceptions in the countries that are not consistent. And a lot of the rules are still left to the individual countries to deal with. And then you have the languages and the culture on top of that. And then all those problems exacerbate even more once you are crossing into new regions, where the entire cultural aspect could be completely different. And also, you have to consider things like the ethics of this, because we know it's common practice in certain countries, India, for instance, to actually charge money from the employees to be placed with a customer, which is not a practice that we would at Paracar at least condone as members of the World Employment Confederation and taking the ethical side of our work really seriously. So these are all obstacles and things you have to consider. So having someone either building that capability internally or finding the right partner to work with, or several partners, or whatever the case may be, is really important, I think, to achieve success when you are expanding globally in terms of your workforce, because it is really complicated. Like the best companies make it look easy, but it really isn't. And I know this firsthand from my 11 years with Kelly, when I was one of the people really helping drive and build that business across Europe with US backbone and a very US centric culture and mentality to start with. And it took a lot of years just to shift that a little bit and actually help Kelly realize that having local expertise and hiring in the individual countries and actually giving responsibility to the regions was the best way forward, because they would much more naturally translate the business into the form it needed to take to be successful in that market.
Yeah, and that's always a question of decentralization versus centralization, right? Where often the central sees it the way they see things, even though, like you said, there's a million differences when you expand globally, and having those regional, understanding those regional differences and ideally decentralizing it a bit and having more regional hubs that understand those differences and are more localized, working in unison with the centralized programs is often something that you see as a best practice.
And it's increasing as well, because for most of my 11 years with Kelly, I worked a lot with international enterprise level MSP programs, and they still tend to this day, I believe. Obviously, I've been out of that for a couple of years now, but they still tend to this day to have a national focus, right? So this is the French MSP program, this is the US one, this is the UK one, or whatever. But what we would see oftentimes within the program is that suppliers would want to supply talent from other countries, and people will be like, what do I do? What about tax? Like, what about VAT? Like, people would just be confused and like, better not. And then they wouldn't do it. Like, our clients would just pull the plug on that, or even the MSP themselves. I've seen Kelly do that just because we didn't know how to manage it. And I think building that expertise within your program, within your company, or finding the right partners to work with that really can navigate that terrain is really critical if you wanna if you're serious about hiring the best talents, no matter where they are based. And if you have a shortage of a certain kind of engineers and you know you can find them in India, then it's pretty stupid not to at least look into how you can access that talent pool in India as well.
So from a program perspective, a lot of the large multinationals have footprints already established. So, there's already a master vendor in a certain jurisdiction in Germany, Italy, etc., France. And how does that work when, you start to think from we want to centralize the program with how doesn't it you start to think about bringing all of these moving parts that are potentially well established and doing good things regionally into a central solution? Like, where have you seen it? Sometimes do they leave it alone? How do they bring it in? Maybe just with technology and reporting. Uh, What are some of the different solutions you've seen?
I don't think there's one easy answer to that question,
It
Jeff. I guess that's
depends,
why we're
as
here, right?
always.
It depends, but it's walking a tightrope, sort of balancing all of those things. So you need to let the individual sort of hubs in the different countries and the talent working there, both the internal talent and the external vendor suppliers, everyone, they need to work in the way that they work to be successful in their market. At the same time, you certainly want a layer of governance about that. You want some technology to harmonize how operational processes are managed, how reporting happens. You need the data from all of these, and they all need to report the data in a format that's consistent enough that you can actually use it for something. That being said, I don't think I made it sound easy, but I made it sound a lot easier than it is, because this is exactly what everyone working in the space is struggling with. Even at PowerCard today, we are working really hard to harmonize and sort of streamline our processes across our 10 countries of operations in Europe, and make sure that everyone works in the PowerCard way, in the right way, and in a way that's consistent with each other to deliver a consistent experience for our customers. But it's just really hard, because every single country has a different idea of what excellence looks like and what a good customer relationship looks like. And even the clients have different expectations across the different countries. Even the multinational clients will expect different things in the different countries. So there's always going to be a trade-off, but the trick is just to roll with it a little bit and accept that it's never going to be completely perfect. And at the same time, if you do that well, you can make it look easy for your customers, and then you harmonize and you streamline and you make things consistent where you can.
Yeah, I think you're nailing it. Like, in terms of acknowledgement of the differences, I think is what's really important, and understanding the commonalities and where you are similar, and then working together to try to have a consistent solution as much as possible while still acknowledging some of those differences, be it tax, be it cultural, be it process, be it hours, be it all of the variables we talked about in terms of, call it, obstacles or things to think about. You need to acknowledge those differences when you go through all those kind of categories, so that you then go and you understand the commonalities so that you can smooth it
That's a
together.
really important point, because while you definitely want to focus on everything which is different and cannot be fully harmonized or consistent, it's also really important to do the opposite and actually map out what can be consistent and what can be the same. I know you love independent contractors, Jeff, and that's a really good example, because you have all of these different criteria and they're weighed differently and they're framed differently in all the different countries. But when you drill down to the core, they're actually all quite similar. So you
Yes.
can actually build a global framework for managing independent contractors with only a certain layer of local adaptation, right? Just to make sure you're hitting the right boxes in the right way in the country. But the framework, the skeleton of all of that can be quite consistent, actually. So there are these opportunities also where things are fairly common globally. We have a pretty unified idea globally of what an independent contractor is. We have a pretty unified global idea of what staffing service is and what it shouldn't be. I know that in the US, they love to throw some outcome based into the staffing world, which is really confusing for me as a European, because we would never. But besides that, it is quite consistent, like in terms of the broader category. So you can still manage your workforce or your external workforce or whatever the case may be in a quite consistent, holistic way. You just have to be really mindful of those local differences.
Yeah, and I think that allows for um, the programs to start to move forward, right? I think
Exactly.
one of the things that often happens in our industry is the fear of messing up because and so when you see all of the variations and differences, it's oh, maybe we shouldn't touch that versus
Exactly.
let's try it and move forward. And I've done my work up front, the homework up front to understand those commonalities and differences, start to move it forward, understanding and I love the word just go with it, right? And we've been watching a lot of the World Cup recently, and I think the Norwegian way of just going with it has got
Just
done
roll.
very well in the World Cup these
Just
days.
roll with it.
Just row with it. Yes,
Yeah, exactly.
exactly. But I think it's important often
Yeah.
understanding that you got to start somewhere and there will be these differences, but creating an environment that, hey, there might be some bumps along this road, but we'll figure it out together, either with your program team, your key stakeholders, current in-country partners, etc. Right?
Yeah. No, you nailed it, and exactly what you said. You just need to start somewhere. And I would never encourage anyone to eat an elephant, but there's a saying that is, "How do you eat an elephant?" And the answer is, you start by taking a bite, and as simple as that, because you can't finish it all in one go anyway. And I actually think that nothing that is worth doing is ever going to be easy. That being said, if you work with the right people and the right partners and you start in the right place with the right guidance, it's definitely manageable. But you need to be mindful of the challenges that comes with going global and respectful of that. And that is something that I really encourage everyone to consider. That don't assume that you can take whatever principles or whatever policies or whatever way of working that you have in your country and just expand that globally. It's going to need some careful navigating, both of work culture and just the interpersonal culture and just the legislation and the regulation. Vacation time is a great example. You don't really get a lot of statutory vacation in the US, while in Europe it's very common to have 4 to 6 weeks,
Yeah.
which is something you have to plan for because you actually need more employees to cover for that, right? Because people are going to be out of office about 10% of the time on vacation.
Yeah, and it does affect the pricing as well in a lot of these situations where you're accruing for some of those things within the rates. It always fascinated me from my experience in the EOR world at People 2.0 when you're dealing with the US multinational that's used to $100 an hour is 110, right? American
Yeah,
dollars. Whereas you go to Europe, that $100 an hour could be upwards to $175 an hour before you even start with any markup, right? Because
yeah,
you're not only having to take into the $100 an hour, there's payroll remittances, what the government gets, but then there's accruals, is what the worker gets in vacation time, overtime pay, different things that have
yeah,
to, termination pay, that have to be
yeah.
accrued into the rate. And that
It's
surprises
complicated,
a
right?
lot of people,
That's a
right?
lot of those additional costs and extra charges, right? So I think as an American, if you look at the European market in particular, it's a little bit different in Asia and Africa, but in Europe in particular, if you take any sort of hiring manager in the US and you show them a US salary for a job that they're hiring for, and then a European salary for the same job, if you exclude like core London and those super expensive places, they're going to say, oh, that's actually quite reasonable. But then you start adding on all the statutory costs and the fact that in the US, any employee is expected to pay a lower income tax and then take a significant portion of their pay, put it into their pension, and then take some of that salary and also put it into a health insurance. Well, actually, all of that is taken care of by the government in most European countries. So
Yeah.
the salary looks lower, but the total cost is still higher. And it actually balances out a little bit where those sort of additional benefits that you get from the government are replacing the benefits you would normally expect to get from an employee. So it's sort of, the salary looks lower, but actually in terms of benefits and total compensation, it might be more similar than you would expect.
Yeah, and like I said, I tried to simplify it by saying, what is the salary? What does the government get? Which is
Yeah,
your payroll things, which then, like you say, some of that benefits back to the worker. And then what does the worker get in accruals that is paid back to them in vacation pay, etc., um, termination, etc.
yeah,
And often, like you say, the base rate will be lower because it's compensated with some of those other pieces. So no, a great way
that's
to
exactly
explain
right.
it.
Yeah,
And I think that is often a shocker with individuals looking to move globally is how do you figure out this pricing? And
yeah,
I think the industry has to do a better job of being more transparent about that and lining things out. But I think, as you expand and you get worried about, oh, am I getting ripped off by a vendor, which is often the case, they think that,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Transparency, just asking for transparency will help them as they go across regions because there is different taxes, there is different remittances in each country. And so having line
100%.
items lining that out is important to feel
And that's where
confident
working.
that you're getting a good value.
100%, and that's where working with the right partners becomes so
Yeah.
important, because I think any US or Canadian corporation looking to expand into Europe or anywhere else, frankly, they should do some research before they actually start doing that, to know what are we going to be facing in terms of costs and expenses and things to consider. Having someone help you sort of map that out really helps, but that can be part of your research to identify the right partners to work with. And then that partner really also needs to do some education up front, right? To show that this is the salary, but what you'll actually be paying every month is this. And we don't have any hidden costs, but these additional costs are actually mandated by the government. And we have to process them by law. And this is what it means for you, Mr. Customer, in terms of what is the total hourly or daily or yearly or whatever cost for your employee. And that's really important.
Yeah. And it's interesting. You mentioned I love independent contractors, obviously, in the company that I've started these days, but um, we've seen a lot of customers that move towards, oh, just can we run this person as an independent contractor to
Yes. Yeah.
avoid that wacky pricing issue that I expected it to be $100 an hour and it turned out to be 175 per hour? Can I just run them as an independent contractor? Is often that way. And there's I hate to say it, but they're trying to drive cost savings, right? In
Yeah.
doing that. So moving towards the legal frameworks for independent contractors and employees, like how have you helped figure out that patchwork when it comes to the regulations and legal frameworks in varying between different countries as you expand globally?
Well, I think the topic of independent contractors is a topic that is constantly in motion, of course. You look at all I call them dependent contractors also that you have now with the ride shares and all of those guys that are kind of technically taking instruction and direction from a company, but still not employees. So it's a really, I think a patchwork is a really good work. It's not really one consistent way to deal with that. I like to think of independent contractors as generally someone that should be more expensive than the same person being employed, because it's actually someone leveraging their expertise to run a
Yeah.
business instead of being an employee. And also you are shifting a lot of your risk to the individual, and that costs money. It's not a cost saving measure. It can certainly be more streamlined from a you pay an invoice instead of paying a salary and having to run payroll and all of these things. But because the employee is now taking their own risk in terms of absences for health reasons or being dismissed and vacation and all of these things, all the accruals that they have to make, and also all the risk that comes with running a business instead of being an employee, less dismissal protection and all of that, it should actually be more expensive. It's not a cost saving measure. For me, using an independent contractor is about using them for the right purpose at the right time, because you need specialized talent that you are not able to build or buy internally, or that you are not able to or should that you should not be expected to have as part of your core team, right? So for me, an independent contractor should, generally speaking, of course, there are many nuances to this. So I'm oversimplifying a lot,
Yeah.
but it should be an external expert that you get into to do very defined work within a independent framework that operates independently, and that is really an additional expert that you, just like you would buy a outsourcing service or you would buy consulting from Deloitte. It's the kind of service where it's based on the premise of expertise that you don't have internally. So it's not a cost saving measure at all. It's actually saving money by sort of forcing people to be independent contractors. Just generates a lot of risk and potential additional cost in the future. If you're audited, then you're in big trouble with the tax authorities, generally speaking.
And we've seen a lot more enforcement of independent
Yeah,
contractor rules across the world, but specifically in European jurisdictions.
yeah, and in
Interestingly
the
enough,
US as
though,
well.
yeah, sorry,
Yeah, in the US as well, you see a lot of
huge,
audits
yeah.
and enforcement around those rules. Yeah,
Yeah, and it's been interesting because the government, there's protection of the worker, but it's also protection of their tax base, I think is a lot of what the enforcement is really going after. And so just using that as a default is a no-no, is what I'm hearing
yeah.
here.
Yeah, like
And then
if you have someone you're looking to employ or you have an employee, just starting with that assumption, then generally speaking, engaging them as an independent contractor is not the way to go because the baseline assumption is incorrect, right? They are essentially someone that you would integrate into your business, and those are not independent. So, yeah,
correct.
exactly
And
right.
we talked about commonalities. And we've had lots of conversations where your thoughts and the ideas around independent contractor being experts, independent, um, and for short periods of time, etc., and bringing their expertise and working as a vendor is common, right, across all jurisdictions. And there'll be nuances to that, but
Yeah,
that
exactly.
definitely is what you should be thinking about when you think about the legislation around that as just a general thought process. The patchwork, though, how do you handle it? Once again, is it through your MSP partners, your internal legal counsel? How do you gain an expertise to then start to move forward, right? Because I think that can be intimidating and often pull people back from moving forward.
I think I mentioned in the beginning of our conversation that the sort of core skeleton of the rules when it comes to freelancers and independent contractors is quite consistent globally.
Yeah,
That being said, how to actually manage the compliance around that is not consistent at all because you have different reporting in different countries, you have different forms, you have different tax liabilities and different things you have to manage. So I think that's where the value of having a local team comes into play. Just to
yeah.
go full circle here and go back to the beginning, where you need those local experts, and either you need to employ them yourself or you can engage a partner that has the right expertise and with people with the right local knowledge as well. So that's just really important because even though you can understand the central framework of how this should work in the different countries, there are always going to be those local nuances in terms of where do you report, what kind of compliance obligations are you taking on, what are the repercussions, how do you manage this actively in a day-to-day capacity, and all of that. And it's just impossible for any single person in a centralized capacity to know that. And I know this personally because I was like literally that person at Kelly that would be expected to know all of these things for all of the European countries and also globally sometimes, and it's just impossible. So I
Yeah.
could build a really good baseline of knowledge for myself, and I really love that part of my job, also researching all the different countries and understanding the nuances, which also helps me or helped me at the time really understand also the similarities which you can draw benefit from, right? But still, ultimately, you're always going to need to rely on either an external partner or a supplier or vendor in the country or some kind of local expertise, whether you rent or buy that from a vendor, from a consulting company, or use an EOR in the country, or find just a staffing supplier that can be your representative in the country. There are many ways to approach it, but it's really important that you choose the right partners to work with or the right strategy for it, and that you do your due diligence in terms of what it actually takes to be successful.
So I hate to have to kind of end this conversation. We've had such great dialogue, and our conversations have always been fascinating and tended to go long, uh, which has been great. And usually it's been over a beverage too, which has been fun.
Yeah.
Um, but we have to wrap up here. And I always wrap things up with a next steps. Like if I'm a program lead, now either being charged with expanding my program globally, or I'm thinking about this topic as one of my 2027 objectives. Where do I start? Right? Where do I start? And what are some stepping stones based on your experiences in the past that really help them build that start a good foundation for that journey?
I think if you're starting from scratch and you're expanding into new territory, I would just start doing some basic research about the countries I'm interested in. And then from there on, you can do some research in terms of what kind of partners can I work with to be successful in these countries. If you already have a footprint and you have a, let's say, a US or Canada program, and you want to expand that globally to also capture your external talent or your whatever talent globally or in different regions or whatever, I would just literally start engaging with the stakeholders that you have in the different countries, understand their perspectives, their challenges, try to learn and understand a little bit about the culture that they work under and how they operate in those countries, which vendors, which suppliers, which talent providers, which talent sources they are heavily reliant on, because that will give you a very early framework in terms of the really important things to consider before you try to expand into that country, and also helps you not to come in and just shoehorn in your US or Canada program over the head of someone who is just not willing to change how they operate
Yeah.
for whatever reason, which could be totally validated also. So just having that baseline understanding of what the challenges in the country is or are, what they are, is really important. Also, stakeholder engagement is just critical, because if you come from the US and tell your French hiring managers or whoever they are that we are now implementing an MSP here and this is how we're doing it, they will be like, thanks, but no thanks.
Yeah.
Because they will feel we were not consulted, we were not brought into this. And maybe that's a very European thing, but we're not very easy to deal with. That's just a fact. And that will be a fact in other countries as well. So just getting people involved at the right level at the right time and having an open dialogue and also listening to your local experts is just absolutely critical.
I think there's no better time than to think about this, given the World Cup and the football slash, let's say soccer for those that on this side of the pond. um, and the beautiful thing that we've seen in the differences in people, cultures, but once again, we're all human, and embracing those differences and understanding those differences through communication and conversation is something that's really important. So, Marius, once again, I think we could talk again and again and over, more and more on this topic, and I always enjoy my conversations with you. But thank you for taking the time out of your day, working there in Kristiansand, Norway, which is from a geography I've looked up, and I thought it was not too far from Oslo, but it's actually quite far from Oslo. So it's about 4.5 hours. Thank you for taking the time today and chatting with me. It's awesome as always.
Thank you, Jeff, for having me on your big TV show. It's been fun as always, and I hope we have an opportunity to talk again soon.
Of course. Talk soon.